Good afternoon to everyone joining us today. Welcome to the Alzheimer's Association's Lunch and Learn Protecting the Family Home. You can learn about other educational programs offered by the Association, including our legal and financial planning program, on www.alz.org or on the Community Resource Finder, www.communityresourcefinder.org, under Alzheimer's Association Programs and Events. And of course, our 24/7 helpline can help anytime, day or night, at 1-800-272-3900. Earlier today, you received an email which includes a PowerPoint slide set. Our apologies for the late delivery, but if you can pull them up, please do so now. I am thrilled to introduce today's presenter, Ronald Fatula. Mr. Fatula is the managing attorney of Ronald Fatula and Associates, a law firm focusing on elder law, estate planning, and special needs planning. Mr. Fatula and his firm are known for their outstanding services to the senior citizen and special needs communities. He has been recognized by AARP, the Arthritis Foundation, Senior Umbrella Network, Parker Jewish Institute for Healthcare and Rehabilitation, as well as the New York State Bar Association. His offices are located in Brooklyn, Manhattan, Long Island, and Queens. Ron is co-chair of the Alzheimer's Association Long Island chapter and a true friend and advocate to the Alzheimer's community. Let's welcome Mr. Fatula.
Thanks so much, Kate. And welcome, everyone, and thanks for taking the time out. This is a very important talk. I assume that the listeners have dealt with this horrible disease, as I have personally, and as an elder law attorney, I deal with it every single day in my practice. And when clients come to me, oftentimes the family home is one of the biggest assets, and clients want to make sure that they could protect the home, typically for a spouse, sometimes for a child, sometimes even for a disabled child. But the thought is, you want to protect assets, and the family home is typically number one on the list. So the topic today, what I'm going to be doing is giving you a very brief Medicaid update, and the main topic will be talking about protecting the home and how to do it. Let's face it, when there's a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or any other type of dementia, whether it's senile dementia or Parkinsonian dementia, a red flag goes up, and if individuals have not planned already, they should plan immediately. I mean, I just came from a client consultation, and the couple was around age 60, and the wife doesn't have dementia at this point, but has lots of issues. And she said, "You've helped some friends of mine, and it was so good. They were protected, and I want to make sure that I have that same protection in light of my illnesses." I urge anyone to plan, even if there isn't an issue, because you want to make sure that you are well protected just in case. It's insurance. So let me give you an update on paying for long-term care. And by the way, I should say, if you do have a question that's on topic while I'm speaking, feel free to ask that. Okay, so how do we pay for long-term care, whether at home or in a nursing home? Well, and I am going through the slides right now. Going to be using the slides very loosely, but again, if you have a question on topic, feel free. Number one way to pay for long-term care is private pay. So if you're wealthy enough to pay for long-term care privately, then you can do it. So if a client comes into me with, we have clients that come into us with, lots of money, a couple of million, 5 million, 10 million plus, and ask, well, how could they get on Medicaid? Well, if you don't help someone with 10 million plus get on Medicaid, the program wasn't meant for someone like that. So, private pay would be the right thing, and then I would direct that client, well, let's sit down and let's do estate planning. Let's do estate tax planning. I also act as a financial advisor, and that's a separate firm other than the law firm, and let's make sure that the investments are in line with what's going on with you personally, et cetera. but we don't do Medicaid planning for that individual. So we want to make sure that if someone has lots of money and they could self-insure, if that's what they choose, they could privately pay. So what's the cost of custodial care at home? Anywhere from a very low of around $15 an hour to $25 an hour plus for custodial care. Obviously, if you need a higher level of care at home, a skilled individual or a nurse, it's certainly going to be higher than that. Nursing home care in the area costs anywhere from a very low of around $10,000 per month. On the slide it says up to $15,000 per month, but here on Long Island, we have a client that's currently paying over $18,000 per month in a facility. It's a great facility with great care, but it's certainly very expensive. And God forbid, should the individual need a ventilator, that cost could easily go up to around $26,000 per month. So it's a very costly, long-term care is very costly, let's face it. So private pay is one option. Number two, long-term care insurance. I strongly advise healthy individuals to buy long-term care insurance. Why do I say healthy individuals? Because when there's a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or any sort of dementia, believe me, the insurance company will not take the individual. Maybe could help the spouse, but not the individual with the disease. So you want to buy that long-term care insurance while you can, while you're healthy enough. So always think about that. Many times I give a 2-hour presentation just on long-term care insurance. I'm going to be skipping that, skipping to the next topic, but just know that long-term care insurance is a viable option. And if anyone has a question about long-term care insurance, you could feel free to you could call me. You could actually call an insurance specialist that handles long-term care insurance. Feel free. I strongly recommend it. It certainly is not a cheap option, but it's a way for an individual to keep their assets, not gift assets, and have the insurance company pay for long-term care, God forbid, should that be needed down the road. And again, if there is a diagnosis of a disease or if the individual is experiencing dementia already, then you won't be able to get that insurance. Okay. Number 3 is Medicare. And I put this down here because I want people to realize that Medicare typically does not pay for long-term care. Many people think that Medicare, I have Medicare, I have my Medigap insurance, I'm all set. Well, you're not all set. The long-term care insurance will cover nursing home care, even assisted living care in many instances. Medicare typically does not cover you long-term, so you should realize that. Medicare is great. And so, for example, how does Medicare cover an individual who may need nursing home care or institutional care? Well, an individual must have a 3-day hospital stay, and the individual must actually be admitted into the hospital. So sometimes when you're in a hospital, you're in a hospital on quote-unquote so-called observation status, where you're really not admitted. Even though you're spending a day or two in the hospital, you're not technically admitted. You need to be admitted to satisfy this 3-day stay requirement so that Medicare could cover the subsequent nursing home if that happens. So these are some of the requirements. You need a 3-day hospital stay where you're admitted in the hospital. You must be admitted into that nursing home after the hospital discharge, and that has to happen within a 30-day period. Then Medicare will pay in full for the first 20 days, and then there's a copay for the last 80 days. But one of the biggest requirements is that you must have a skilled care requirement for Medicare to cover up to those 100 days. And as Kate had heard me talk about this many times, I call this discriminatory because it basically discriminates against the Alzheimer's population that many times does not have a skilled care need but needs nursing home care. Medicare will not cover the nursing home 100-day stay if it's only custodial care. So if someone has dementia, they need to be in a nursing home, but they don't need skilled care. They don't need physical therapy. They don't need physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, etc. They don't need to be under a doctor's or nurse's supervision constantly. What they have is very bad dementia, very hard for the individual to be taken care of at home for a myriad of reasons. Well, that's oftentimes not a skilled care need. And Medicare won't cover any of the stay. So how does this work? Well, if the individual satisfies most of these requirements, individual then goes into a nursing home from the 3-day hospital stay. Medicare will take a look. Let's say there is a skilled care need because the individual broke a hip, let's say, and the hip was replaced, and now that individual is getting physical therapy, and that's great. So as long as that therapy is happening, and as long as that therapy will not only improve the individual's care, but the new standard is as long as that therapy is keeping that individual in the same place. Without that therapy, that individual's condition could decline. With the therapy, that individual could at least stay stable. And that's a new standard for Medicare because it used to be the improvement standard. The therapy had to make you better. Now the standard is much better for us as long as that therapy keeps you in check, keeps you in the same place, maintains your current situation, then Medicare will cover. And that's pretty big. But it oftentimes, again, doesn't cover an Alzheimer's or an individual with dementia. So we look to the Medicaid program. And so the rest of my talk, we'll talk about protecting the family home and Medicaid specifically, because Medicare is not a means-tested program. So you don't have to give away assets. You could have $1 million in the bank, and you're still going to get Medicare. But you're not going to get Medicaid with $1 million in the bank. So let me talk about that at this point. And I do want to I'm going to touch upon Medicaid a little bit so you have some of the basics, and then I want to talk about specifically how to protect the family home, the different ways to do it, and what typically is the best way in light of where the individual is. So, for example, if there's a spouse, maybe you're protected one way. If there's a disabled child, there's a big, huge exception if the home is transferred to that disabled child, but prior to applying for Medicaid. Or if the individual needs to go into a nursing home right away, there could be a different way to plan for that home. Or if the individual is at home, even at home getting Medicaid home care, well, maybe the plan is very different if we don't anticipate nursing home care for 5 years. So let's roll up our sleeves. If you do have those slides out, I'm only on slide 3, but no worries. I'm going to quickly run through some of these slides and go to the main event on protecting the family home. But you won't understand, what I'm going to talk about with the home unless you have some of the basics. So let me talk about Medicaid eligibility and home care specifically. Well, for home care and nursing home care, the Medicaid asset level is only $14,850. Plus, you could have some exempt resources. One of the biggest exempt resource is a retirement account. And I'm happy to say that I was the one that changed the law on this about 10 years ago with a case that we had in Queens. And after we argued this in front of New York City Medicaid, even without going through a lawsuit, New York City said, okay, based on the briefs that you submitted, we're not going to pursue this. Your client could get Medicaid and keep his $300,000 IRA. And that was the first time that in New York State that anyone was able to keep a retirement account and go on Medicaid. The retirement account is only exempt if the retirement account is in payout status. So, for example, when you reach 70 and a half and you start taking your distributions out, well, then the IRA is exempt or could be exempt. Some Medicaid districts actually are stricter and make you take out more money than what the IRS makes you take out, which is a minimum. And you just have to be aware of that. So if the elder law attorney, if that elder law attorney is doing a Medicaid application, for home care or nursing home care, and says, well, you may have to take out a little bit more, and your financial advisor is saying, no, I'm working out these numbers, and you don't have to take out that much. Well, it's because Medicaid is a bit stricter. But since that IRA is exempt, what do you think Medicaid wants you to do? They want you to take more of that distribution out so they could force you to sometimes use that money towards your care. Okay? So let's talk about Medicaid at home. You can only keep $14,850. There are some exempt resources such as retirement accounts like IRAs, 401ks, etc., that are exempt if they're in payout status. You could keep income typically of $845 a month. You could even keep more income than that because who can actually live on $845 a month anywhere in New York State, but especially Long Island? I make a joke of this, but it's really not a joke. Many times we'd be happy and lucky if just the taxes on our homes are $845 a month, let alone being able to live, and live a full life on $845 a month. So fortunately, there is a way for an individual, the applicant, to keep all of the income that's coming in so that the income can be used for the individual. And that's with a pooled income trust. You see that as item 3 on on slide 3. But if the income is, let's say, $2,300 a month between Social Security and a pension and maybe some distribution on an IRA, with that pooled income trust, we could save all of that. You should know that if there's a spouse, we can use spousal refusal. But what I want everyone to know that in a home care setting, there is absolutely no look back. So, for example, you know that the Medicaid eligibility level, the asset level, is $14,850 plus the exempt resources. Let's say an individual has $114,850. And let's say today, April 29th, that Medicaid future applicant, that individual that's going to apply for Medicaid, gifts away $100,000 to get down to the Medicaid asset level of $14,850. That individual makes that gift today. As long as the assets are not over the $14,850 as of the first day of the next month, let's say in this case, May 1, then that individual is financially eligible for Medicaid at home. Can you get 4 hours a day? Absolutely. Can you get 8 hours a day? Absolutely. What about 12 hours a day? Well, It's harder to get more hours lately. However, I found that if we pushed, we can get 12 hours, even a 24-hour sleep-in person where an individual sleeps in the home. But it's quite hard to get two 12-hour shifts if you need a new person every 12 hours. Okay, let's talk about Medicaid in a nursing home. You could keep the same $14,850. The well spouse can typically keep up to $119,220. We can use the concept of spousal refusal again, because if there is a spouse and that spouse has assets over the Medicaid level, that spouse can sign a spousal refusal and say that he or she, the well spouse, refuses to use his or her income and or assets to support the sick spouse, and then Medicaid will not look to those assets for eligibility purposes only. But Medicaid could then go back and try to recover against those assets, but there are ways that the elder law attorney can basically eliminate or reduce the chance of a spousal suit. But what you really need to be aware of, as I said, for Medicaid at home, to get a home health attendant at home, there's no look back. You could give away money in 1 month and be eligible for Medicaid home care the first day of the next month. Not so when it comes to nursing home care. For nursing home care, there is a 5-year look back. And so you want to try to do your planning 5 years in advance so that we could be assured, so that the elder law attorney could be assured that you can protect all of your assets. Now, there are lots of planning techniques that we can use along the way, but if you want to protect all of the assets, it's best to try to do the planning 5 years before nursing home care is needed. Okay? And look, we're not God. We never know when we're going to need that level of care, but we try to do the best we can. Certainly, if there's a diagnosis of dementia, planning should be done immediately. And to be honest, anyone 50 years of age or older should be thinking about these issues. Maybe the only thing that they do is, if they're healthy, is purchase long-term care insurance. But you should think about these issues. But especially if there's a diagnosis of any sort of dementia, you certainly want to make sure that you have a plan in place, because there is a 5-year look back, and that look back starts when an individual is in a facility, his or her assets are under the Medicaid asset level plus the exempt assets, and then Medicaid basically looks back, and they look back to see what gifts were made. And if there are any gifts within that 5-year period, there could be a Medicaid penalty where Medicaid will actually Medicaid will not cover the care right away. There'll be a period of time that Medicaid will not cover the care, and that's really a big issue. It's you want to do the planning in advance. You should know that, let's say an individual needs a nursing home right away. There are ways to protect assets, sometimes all of the assets, but typically at least half of the assets right away, immediately, whether it's through certain types of transfers, possibly a trust, and possibly a promissory note rule of halves, where we could save about half of the assets. You should know that there are some exempt transfers. In other words, Medicaid will say, yes, even though you transferred assets, we're not going to count it against you, even if you go into a nursing home right away. And some of the more popular exempt transfers are to a spouse and to a disabled child. But when it comes to the home, and I'm on slide 7, one way to really protect that home if nursing home care is needed, is making one of these exempt transfers. So let's go over what these exempt transfers are. Number one, transfer the home to a spouse. That's exempt. What if you do it the day before you want to apply for Medicaid in a nursing home? No worries, because that's an exempt transfer. Number two, transfer that home to a disabled, blind, or disabled child. That's exempt. So, and it's a disabled child of any age. So we've had a situation where that disabled child might be 80 years old, and mom is 99 years old and going into a nursing home. We've had that. It's a disabled child of any age, or a blind or minor child. Number three, transferring the home to a brother or sister of the applicant who's lived with the applicant for about a year before institutionalization and who has an equity interest in the home. And Medicaid looks at equity interest very loosely. What they say is, as long as that brother or sister helped to pay for some of the bills at home, that's an exempt transfer. That's fine as an equity interest, and the transfer of that home to that brother or sister would be exempt. And this is how it would work out. Let's say brother and sister, both at home, both widowed. Sister has a home in, let's say, Nassau County. Brother lives in Suffolk County. Sister is not doing well. Brother says, you know what, sis, I'm going to come in to live with you. You have Alzheimer's, and I know it's getting rough. I'm going to help to pay for some of the expenses on the home. After 1 year, not 5 years, after 1 year, that home could be transferred to that sibling, and that's it. No waiting period beyond that. We have a similar exception for an adult child who lives in the home for at least 2 years before institutionalization that helps with some of the caregiving, or at least manages the caregivers. Okay? So in the same similar situation, maybe child's living with mom for his or her lifetime, and that's easy. That's a 2-year period, which you don't have to calculate. But in the same vein as the prior example, let's say that mom is not doing well with Alzheimer's. The daughter moves in with mom, lives there for 2 years, and then helps to manage the caregivers and manages, mom's care at home. She doesn't have to be the caregiver, but there's a lot on the shoulders of the individual that manages all of this, as I'm sure some of you that are listening know about. Well, if daughter lives in that home for just 2 years, not the 5 years, and then that home is transferred to the daughter, well, that's an exempt transfer, and that's one surefire way of protecting the home. But the last two exceptions, not only does it protect the home, but it encourages people to do good things. It encourages a sibling, a brother or sister, to move in with their sibling to take care of them, and that's great. And it encourages an adult child to come back to the home and to be a caregiver, or at least to help with the caregiving or manage the caregiving for mom. So it encourages the children or sibling to do good things, and it's a way to protect an enormous amount of assets, depending on what the value of that house is, but it's a surefire way to do it. On page 8, I do want to talk about the home equity limitation. In February of 2006, less than 10 years ago, the federal government put a limit on the equity that you could have in a home, a co-op, or condo if you want to get Medicaid. And that was, it was different years ago. It started at $500,000 and went up to $750,000. Now it's $828,000. That's the home equity that an individual can have and go on Medicaid. If your equity in that home is more than $828,000, Medicaid will say you're too rich to go on Medicaid. So we want to do these transfers if the home is worth more than that. And what I've seen, especially here on Long Island, I see it all the time. Mom or dad bought the home years and years ago for $20,000, but now the home is worth $1 million. And they're too rich to go on Medicaid, according to the federal government. And so this is the country we live in at this point. The equity limitation, however, and I'm on the bottom of slide 8, does not apply if there's a spouse, a minor, blind, or disabled child living in that home. So if there's a spouse living in that home and your home is worth $1.5 million, well, you're okay. You still could go on Medicaid. Okay. Now, I'm going to spend about another 5 minutes-ish or 10 minutes or so, probably about 10 more minutes, and talking about planning options regarding the home. And then I'm going to open it up. If anyone does have a question, please don't feel shy. One way, and I'm on page 9, is to transfer that home but have the individual, let's say mom or dad, retain a life estate. A life estate is the right to the possession, the use, and control of that home for the individual's lifetime. So let's say mom would transfer the home to the children, retain a life estate, the right to live in the home for the rest of his or her life. Is that a good planning option? The answer is it's okay, but it's not the best. But I want you to understand it. What's good about it is mom is getting the home out for Medicaid purposes, number one. It's also good because mom gets to live there. That's good. What's also good is the value of that life estate is not considered an asset for Medicaid unless the home is sold. And so now here comes the reason why it's often not so great. Many times a client would say, I'm never going to sell this home. I'm going to live here. They're going to take me out, and I've heard this phrase used, and I hate it, but I heard it used so many times. They're going to take me out feet first from this home. What a lovely thought. But you know what happens oftentimes? That's what the individual wants, but the individual doesn't think about, not when I'm in my 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe I'm in my 90s, and home is not appropriate anymore, and I'm in a facility, and my kids want to sell this home, but the tax advantages aren't so great, and it's not great for Medicaid purposes if I sell that home with the life estate. So it's limiting. It is an option, but it's limiting. Another way to do it is transferring the home outright without a life estate, and that's really a bad idea. Many times people call up their real estate attorney, just transfer the home to my kids. And boy, what a mistake. For starters, the basis in that house, let's say you bought that house for $20,000 or even $100,000, whatever your basis is, and a basis is calculated by your purchase price plus capital items, not repairs, but new capital items that you put in, like an extension to the house or a new roof or a new furnace, etc. So let's say you bought the house years ago for $50,000. You put in $50,000 of capital improvements. You have a $100,000 basis. Now that home is worth $1 million. I hear this all the time on Long Island. And if you just call your real estate attorney and say, just transfer the house. So your attorney transfers the house. What happens? Your low basis of $100,000 is simply transferred over to the kids or whoever you transferred the home to. So whenever they sell the home, in my example, there's going to be capital gains, and the capital gains rate went up, will be taxed on $900,000. And he didn't need to be taxed on that at all. So let me go over, on the next couple of slides, I talk about how to calculate the life estate. We talk about a couple of different options. And I want to talk about, I'm now on slide 17, and I will backtrack a little bit, but slide 17, the gold standard. If you believe that there's 5 years that you have before an individual would need a nursing home, even if the individual is getting Medicaid to pay for the home care, the best way, the gold standard in most circumstances, not all, but most circumstances, is to transfer that home into a Medicaid irrevocable asset protection trust. Why is it the gold standard? Why is it the best way? Well, number one, the home is out for Medicaid purposes, and that's great. Number two, upon death, your kids or whoever you transfer, whoever your beneficiary is going to be, will get a basis step up. The basis won't be a low basis or the $100,000 in my example. Let's say the home at the time of the death of the individual is going to be, the value of the home will be $1.5 million. Well, that would be the basis for the children. So when they go to sell the house, there is no capital gains taxes. You save hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, in my example, by transferring that home to the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. And what if you wanted to sell that home during your lifetime? Well, you still get the $250,000 exclusion from capital gains if you lived in that home for 2 out of the last 5 years. And there is an exception if you spent a year in a nursing home. They lessen the standard. They say 1 year in a nursing home, you could use that. But you still get the capital gains tax exclusion, and that's huge. So you're transferring the home out, but you're getting all of the tax benefits, and that's the way to go. And another huge, huge benefit is that the home is protected from any creditors that the children or the beneficiaries might have. You know, we had a client who said, no, I don't want to do a trust. It's too complicated. Well, he transferred the home to a child who was a doctor. He was a doctor. And you say, oh, a doctor, doctor, they make all make lots of money. This doctor was sued and didn't have enough insurance and put the home at jeopardy. It was settled, and it was ultimately okay, but why run the risk? The trust is a great way to go. I want to backtrack, and on the slides, if you just go to page 15, and you'll see an intent to return home. When we draft powers of attorneys for our clients, we put in so many provisions regarding Medicaid planning, estate planning, etc. One of those provisions is an intent to return home. Let's say there is no spouse, no disabled child. We can't wait 5 years and transfer that home into a trust. The individual, let's say, I'm giving an example, might have had dementia or something happened and now had a stroke. Things got worse. You need a nursing home right away, and you have this home. Do you have to wait 5 years? No. If there's an intent to return home, that home is exempt for Medicaid purposes as long as the equity in that home is not greater, or a home, co-op, or condo, is not greater than $828,000. So what we put in our powers of attorneys for anyone, because I just want this there, is that if I ever find myself in a nursing home, let it be known that I have this intent to return home, back home. And that intent is subjective. What does that mean? It means that it's in your brain. If you intend to return home, no one could say that you can't return home, it won't work. As long as you want to return back home, that will be an exception, and that's really crucial. So,
Ron, you asked me to let you know when it was 1:45.
okay, so I'm going to close in just a moment. So think about an intent to return home when the attorney does that Medicaid application if there's not much time before the individual needs a nursing home. So those are the basics. I urge you to look at the slides so that you get some more detail. But in closing, I would say the best way to plan for the home is to see a good elder law attorney. I happen to be chairing the legal committee for the Alzheimer's Association, the Long Island chapter, and we have a great roster of elder law attorneys likely in your area, or feel free to call me or anyone on our legal committee. They're great attorneys. And the last item is, if you can, plan ahead, because your options are much, much greater if you plan ahead. So, Kate, that'll end my presentation, but I'm certainly...
Mr. Lenz?
Yes.
This is Catherine, the operator. You do have a question for Laurie Wynn?
Okay, Laurie, sure.
I actually have several, but the first one that came up with what you were saying is the equity in the home the same thing as the assessed value of the home?
No, not at all. The assessed value is for tax purposes. Medicaid is looking for the equity, so it's like apples and oranges.
I don't know what the house is worth if that's the case.
Sure.
How do I find out?
Well, when we do a Medicaid application, oftentimes we have our client get a letter from a real estate broker, or they get an appraisal. Sometimes, as you can imagine, there's always a range of value. Sometimes we want to get a little bit lower of a value to try to get under that $828,000 in equity if we're a little over. But what equity value means is your equity in the home. So, for example, let's say the home is valued at $800,000. You're fine.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the home is valued at $850,000. You're over. But let's say you took out a mortgage or a reverse mortgage for $50,000, bringing you under the $828,000.
Oh, I know what the house is next door to me, and it's the same house went for, and it's approximately the same as the assessed value.
Which
That's
is
why,
about how much?
It's under. It's just under 500,000. So
okay, so then you should be fine. But I need you to understand that just because, for example, like on an intent to return home, just because the home could be exempt or would be exempt doesn't mean later on they can't try to get their money back out of the home and put a lien on the home.
Mm-hmm.
A lien and a recovery can happen. So you want to see the elder law attorney to make sure that there's no lien or recovery.
You see, I have seen an elder law attorney. That's part of my other question. I had a revocable trust made up in September '08. And years later, the attorney got in touch with me and told me that the law had changed and we were no longer protected.
Can I correct you for a moment?
Sure, you can correct me, but this is what I was told.
Yeah,
then I was told that the law hadn't changed since '06.
The law changed radically on February 5th, 2006. Yes, that's correct, with the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 that was signed in February of 2006. That's true. But it didn't change the fact that assets held in a revocable trust were never exempt from Medicaid. Never.
So he wrote up the wrong kind of trust.
I don't know your circumstances.
Well, my circumstances is I'm disabled. I've been taking care of my mother for 13 years.
I'm sorry, we can't get too specific in our questions here.
Okay.
They should be general so that everyone involved can benefit from the answers.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I should say, just so you know, if you are disabled and Mom transfers that home to you directly, you don't, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have that 5-year wait.
Right, but do I lose my benefits? Because I was told if I have too much, I'll lose all my benefits, and that includes a home.
As Kate said, I mean, it's a very specific question. You need to know all of your information.
Right.
I suggest you speak to your elder law attorney, or if you're not comfortable with that individual, a different one. It could be anyone on the roster. We have a great group of elder law attorneys.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Catherine, can you just review how someone can ask a question?
Yes. If you would like to ask a question, press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Okay, and at this time we have no more questions.
Okay. Well, I personally want to thank the Alzheimer's Association for this opportunity to talk about the home and protecting the home. I hope that you've listened to this carefully and have gotten something from it, and that the home will be protected. I really hope you take that advice. And as an attorney, if you don't mind me saying this, Kate, I urge everyone listening to, if you can, try to support the association. It's an amazing organization, and any sort of support that you can give would be terrific. And what we do in our practice, many times our clients would ask, we're doing a will or a trust, but I do want to give to some charitable organizations. I always mention the Alzheimer's Association. So if you are charitably inclined, I would urge that you would at least